do that. I will say this. We are. I love listening to my kids' commentary on my breaking strings. I wish you could hear it. It's good stuff. We are humbled to have this opportunity to share with you this morning. And some of you may not even know who we are. And if you don't, I'm Bernie Gillott. I'm the fourth. The third is sitting there, and the fifth is in the back room praying as they close down worship. This is my beautiful wife, Sarah. And yes, please clap. And if I don't owe it to God or my family, I owe it to my wife. I have hit the jackpot. I'm married up, and literally...
This is weird because I'm very short, so you're actually married down.
I see what you did there. I am incredibly blessed because how many of you, before you were married, made a checkbox list for God? God, I'd like them to be this and this and this. And if you haven't found that forever someone, I encourage you to make a list. I encourage you to go to God with specifics of what you believe He's created. Again, trusting Him. She checks all the boxes and more. And I am just so blessed to be on this journey of life with my wife, Sarah, who is so humble she doesn't even realize that's just who she is.
So we have 3 kids. Natalie is 17, senior in high school. Bernie, the fifth, as he said, is 15. He is a sophomore. And then Lucas, our youngest, was playing the bass. Natalie was singing with us, and Lucas was playing the bass. He is 12. He will be 13 around Christmas time. So we are very, very blessed. I am Bernie obviously is in ministry. I'm a missionary to Hampton City Schools. I'm a teacher, and that is how I see my vocation. It's actually funny. Total side note: we were at an event I was at an event for my daughter, and I was talking to a whole bunch of parents that I did not know, and they were all talking and complaining about school, and they were specifically complaining about math and their kids' math. And then we didn't know each other, someone turned and said, "So what do you do?" I said, "I'm a math teacher." And I go, "I'm sorry. I'll go mingle at another table now." But I do, we are firm believers that wherever God has you is your mission field. And so I believe that I'm a missionary. It's just that my location for missions is to be a light in the schools. So we are honored to share with you this morning.
So this morning we've been entrusted with the task of launching a new series, and it's called Kingdom. There are so many misconceptions about what success looks like in our life, right? What does a good kingdom look like? But I said this earlier, I'm going to say it again. You're going to probably hear me say it multiple times. John the Baptist gave us great counsel when he said to his disciples, "I must decrease so He can increase." And frequently we can have an attitude of, this is what I want, or this is what makes me comfortable. But that doesn't line up with this principle of He must increase and I must decrease. And the irony is, what we cling to so closely often is keeping us from God's perfect design for our lives.
And Jesus talked a lot about kingdom. He would talk about how He had brought a new kingdom, right? And with that, He brought teachings. And we look throughout history, whether people believe Jesus was God or not, you hear it commonly said, well, He was a good teacher, though, right? So people will acknowledge that. But what's interesting is so much of Jesus' teachings were actually opposite of what the culture of that day or the culture of today would teach, right? And yet, it's successful when we follow God's teachings, right? Just look at Chick-fil-A. They will talk about that they follow biblical principles in their leadership training and in their model, and look at how wildly successful they are as the cars wrap around the building, right? So why does Jesus' teachings, and yet you will get through there faster than Wendy's when there's only one car in front of you. That's just my
Are we trying to get sponsored by Chick-fil-A? Because I'm in.
They're close today anyway. But why does it work? Right? Why do Jesus' teachings work if they're opposite of what our culture says? Well, simply put, Jesus was there at the creation of the world, right? John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Who is the Word? Jesus. If Jesus was there and part of the creation process, then Jesus knows what makes creation work well. So we would do well to listen to Jesus' teachings, even though they might make us pause sometimes and think, well, that's the opposite of what culture tells us. And there's lots of examples of Jesus' I call it backwards kingdom. The backwards kingdom, what we think would establish a successful kingdom versus what Jesus teaches, right? If you want to be great, you have to do what? Serve. Well, that's the opposite of what we think of in our culture, right? When it comes to our enemies, what does Jesus call us to do? Love them, forgive them, serve them. Well, that feels opposite or counterintuitive. And what we want to talk about this morning is this backward teaching that Jesus offers us freedom through surrender.
Say that one more time.
Jesus offers us freedom through surrender.
And so I remember I had been in ministry for probably 10 or 12 years, and I came to this new church, and I was serving there, and I had never had a lead pastor like make me turn in my notes before I spoke on a Sunday. I was just trusted. And I remember I handed him my notes, and he just like critiqued the whole thing. It was very humbling. One of the many opportunities God has had to continue to grow me in my humility. And one of the things he said to me, and I'll never forget it, it changed the way I taught from that day on. He said, you need to have a thesis. You need to have one line that you can say to them, that this line is the line that if they forget everything else you say, if they take this with them, they can have something to work on throughout the week. And so I now call it a big idea because thesis sounds too smart, and I'm not that smart. So my big idea this morning is this. We experience true freedom when we surrender everything to Jesus. We experience true freedom when we surrender everything to Jesus. Let's play a little word association game. If you want to call out, you can. If you want to look at your neighbor, that's fine too. I want you to give me the word association that you think of when you hear the word love. God. Hearts. Good. How about forgive? Hard. That's good. Serve. Not let. Church. Okay. I like it. And then surrender. God. Okay. I like it. See, when we think of surrender, it doesn't necessarily have a positive connotation, does it? It's like, well, I've got to give up what I want for something that someone else wants. But Jesus is called to surrender to him, and it changes everything. And at the same time, many of you are like me, and you're already uncomfortable. Surrender? I don't know. And if we've been in church a long time, we may think the idea of surrender is fun. Maybe it's cool and it has its benefits, but as we think deeper, we realize that it costs something. That it might require something of us.
I think maybe part of the reason I feel like that is, unless it's just me, the older I get, I feel like success is when I have everything all put together, right? When I have all of my ducks in a row, and I know actually where my ducks are and that they are in a row, then I feel good. Like, then I'm successful. I've put things together and put pieces together. So this idea of surrendering feels like a loss of control, and then it feels like, well, that can't possibly be what would make me successful or what God would want. And so we start to feel unsettled. But the amazing thing is when we surrender control to Jesus, what he gives us that freedom is actually peace. When it's that we don't have to have everything figured out and we don't have to understand every step on our journey, but we can surrender it and trust him. It's actually an exchange. And what I have found is that when I give up what I've given up, what I get back is so much better from Jesus anyway. So
I always say we give him our trash and he gives us back his treasure. Our passage for this morning comes from the Gospel of Matthew. And interestingly, even though it is a very popular verse that most of you could probably quote, but as popular it is, it's only in the Gospel of Matthew. And it's sandwiched between two reasonably obscure teachings. We know that Jesus was always intentional, so let's look at what leads up to our passage. Jesus has been teaching on how people rejected John the Baptist. He condemns the towns who saw him do miracles and didn't respond with repentance and belief. And he thanks God that God has revealed his truth to children. And he explains that those who know and experience Jesus know and understand the Father. He then continues with this well-known passage, Matthew 11:28. Then Jesus said, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light. How many of you could do with some more of this in your life? Am I the only one? I would like some more of this, Jesus. We're going to talk about how to get there.
Well, this is a passage that we've heard so many times before. So when we were looking at it, I said, all right, so then is there anything I'm missing in here? You know, one of the amazing things, if you walk with Jesus for a length of time, have you found that you can read the same passage again and again, and the Holy Spirit highlights different things, right? So I looked back and I was like, all right, so what's the Greek in here? So can I geek out on some Greek for just a minute?
Go ahead.
A few of the words here, I looked up, and it really just kind of shifted my thinking on it. So the first one, Jesus says, come to me, all of you who are weary and heavy laden. That word heavy laden, fortizo, it's to load or to be weighted down. And right there, I was like, okay, now I relate.
I get it.
Weighted down, because that's such an accurate word picture, right? That sometimes we just feel weighted down in life. So Jesus says, if that's you, come to me. And he says, I will give you rest. The word rest, anapao, to give rest, it's an intermission from labor, and it implies refreshment. What a beautiful picture. So Jesus says, here's the opposites that Jesus is offering. You feel weighed down, come to me and you'll feel refreshed. What an amazing promise, right? And then he says, my yoke is easy, it's Christos, it's serviceable, it's good. And here's a neat word for this. When Jesus says the yoke I have for you, the word means well-fitted. What Jesus has for us, it's well-fitted for us. Sometimes we try to push ourselves into a mold that is not what Jesus had designed us for. But Jesus says, come to me if you're weighed down, I'll refresh you. What I have for you is well fitted for you. And then the next word, my burden is light. And I'm like, well, burden, that doesn't sound like a good thing, right? Jesus, you just said you were taking from me, so why are you giving me a burden? But this word burden, actually it's a fortune, and it's a burden that must be carried by that individual, not transferable to someone else. So what Jesus has for us that is well fitted for us, it's well fitted just for us. That's the specific plan. And it's such a great picture of opposites, right? Weighted down, refreshed. Feel like we're trying to force ourselves into something, and Jesus says, no, what I have for you, it's perfectly fitted for you. And it is good. So if I took all of that, and I created the NSV, it's the New Sarah version. Okay, now, I am not calling this divine inspiration, okay? So, don't stone me right now. But I'm just saying, when I took all of this and put it together, here's how I would kind of describe what this passage is saying, okay? If you're tired of trying to live up to all the demands of your world and your culture, then Jesus says, come follow me instead. I have unique plans for you that are perfectly suited for you and how you are wired. When you follow me, live as I've modeled, and walk as I've taught, you'll find the plans I have for you will restore your strength and breathe hope and joy into your weary soul.
How cool is that? You know, it's amazing to me because Jesus came onto the scene and he looked at everyone and said, I have a better way. And I would propose to you, if Jesus were walking the streets today, he would look at me again and say, bro, I would be happy if you called me bro for the record. Because he probably would want to call me, hey, dum-dum. But if I get bro, that's a win. But he would say, I have a better way. You know, I like to look at different paraphrases, translations, and I like the way the Message says it as well. Take this in. Are you tired? Worn out? Burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me. Work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Anybody besides you want to sign up for that? Because that is what God designed us for. We're talking about God's kingdom today and how he can help us grow into what he's called us to be, and that comes as we find freedom through surrender. So we experience, go ahead, say it with me, true freedom when we surrender everything to Jesus.
And I think this is one of, like we had said, it was kind of a backwards teaching. Our society and our culture teaches us kind of to, and even our human nature, teaches us to fight against being told what to do, right? We resist that. Isn't that a human nature thing? You don't really want to be told what to do. And so sometimes people will give that reason for being resistant to following Jesus. When they look at Jesus' teachings, they think, well, Jesus equals rules. And I don't want rules because I just want to go with what feels right for me, right? And so we start to walk in that. And so that's why this concept of surrender can feel kind of offensive to people. Because you're like, but my rights are that I can choose what I think is best for me. How can Jesus be telling me that his way is better when I thought that whatever I feel would be right for me?
And so our society teaches us that our feelings should be the highest authority. If I feel it, it must be right. Unfortunately, too often our feelings are not actually trustworthy. The Bible talks about that. And let's just talk about the irony of feelings. We fight against the idea of following Jesus because we don't want anyone to tell us what to do. And yet we often allow ourselves to be slaves to the unreliable whims of feelings, even though living that way has caused heartache and regret. But here's the truth about feelings. Feelings deal in reactions instead of responses, comfort instead of character, temporary highs instead of long-term health. Often making decisions based on only our feelings leads to messes that we later need to clean up. But there is good news this morning, because if we experience true freedom when we surrender everything to God, we know where we're headed. We know where we want to go. And this includes freedom from being controlled by our feelings.
So when we talk about what to surrender, sometimes we just think surrender, oh, it must just mean sins. I should surrender my sins. But there's so many other things that Jesus is calling us to surrender this morning. And maybe for you, I know I've been in this place before, I need to surrender being controlled by my feelings. Letting the whims of my feelings take me in a certain direction or cause questions or doubts. And so maybe it's those feelings like Bernie was talking about. Maybe it's not your inner feelings weighing you down. Maybe it's outside pressure from the world that's weighing you down. Do this, be this way, cheer for this, stand up for this. And it's interesting that the teachings that Matthew had right before this and are leading up to it, they focus on the dangers in living based on the crowd. So Jesus is teaching, and he's teaching about John the Baptist and those who rejected John the Baptist. He was rejected by the crowds. And the crowds, even though Jesus had done miracles, they didn't accept him or believe. And he's condemning those people who are going with the crowds. Because here's the amazing thing. The surrender that we have, the freedom Jesus offers, is a personal thing. It happens when we say, God, I want to connect with you personally. Doesn't matter what's happening around me. I'm going to surrender to you and experience your freedom. True freedom isn't found in the crowd. It's offered through the cross. And it only happens when we come and lay at his feet and say, God, whatever it is, anything, I surrender it to you.
One of the biggest feelings that a lot of us struggle with and need to surrender to Jesus, how many would agree, is worry?
Can I put both hands up? And my feet.
I often say to my kids, worry is wasted energy. But I also love, I think it's your mom that we've joked with about worrying about things, where you say, we worried about all those things and none of them ever happened. She's like, why do you think they didn't happen? But can I be real with you when I say, I do believe we worry about things that if we would learn to surrender to God, we are carrying a weight we weren't intended to carry. And worry can be addictive until our brains are trained to its dangerous path. And instead of instantaneously pray without ceasing, cast all your cares on him because he cares for you, don't worry about anything, instead pray about everything, we go, I should worry about that. I didn't even realize I should worry about it until you mentioned it. And now that you say it, Worry sounds like a good idea. Anybody besides me ever gone down that road? Now, I'll be honest. This isn't a great struggle for me because I just didn't have that option to worry about things growing up. My parents made it clear worrying was not my problem. So, but at the same time...
I brought that expertise into the marriage. You're welcome. But that was one of my fortes.
I was not in any way intending to demean worry. How many of you know sometimes you understand certain things better than others? And when you walk down that road, sometimes we ask ourselves, why do we have to face that? When I believe sometimes we face those things because God will let that challenge be something we can encourage others with because he's helped us defeat it. And so this morning, it's not about being perfect. It's not about never worrying. It's not about finding a way to find spiritual perfection. It's about saying every day, God, I want to walk closer to you. Every day, I want to make myself more like you. And that surrender is the key. Because I surrender to him, things change. And let me be clear. Oftentimes, the thing we worry about and do something take us away from God's well-fitted, perfect design for our lives. And let me also say this, disclaimer. What brings you life isn't always easy, but it always builds strength and health.
And sometimes I think we're trying to control things out of like actual good intentions.
Absolutely.
Right? Like we think, well, the longer I follow Jesus, shouldn't I kind of have some of these things already in order and under control? So our heart is actually to say, you know, well, I want to, God, I want to have that what I offer to you is good. I want to be offering something that's good to you. I want to be put together. But here's the beautiful thing. Jesus doesn't expect us to be able to put all our pieces together or in order. That's not what he's asking for. And sometimes we show our love for him better when we offer our lives and our decisions to him to lead us anyway. So we think, God, I want to present something that's good. Lord, I want to show you that, you know, I'm growing in you. I'm walking closer to you. And so we want to hold control, like, with good intentions. But God's saying, you know what? I'm not asking you to carry that. I'm not asking you to have it figured out. I want you to show you love me and trust me by letting me guide you. And we won't always understand Jesus' ways. I mean, maybe you do, and we can have coffee together.
Let me know.
We won't always understand his ways, but there's a quote I always kind of default back to, and a lot of people are kind of credited with saying it. Certainly it's not original from me. But a God I can completely comprehend is no God at all. I am so thankful that I serve a God who knows more than I do. And a God who has the pieces ready to be put in place and is already putting them in place, and I can trust him.
And the beautiful thing about Jesus, one more time, is not about us being perfect. I love the saying, he catches his fish, then he cleans them. How many of you take a shower and then take another shower? Like, that's the way we treat it. God is here to bring us closer to him in relationship with him. And when we open ourselves up to him and surrender, he takes care of the cleaning. He brings things together that we never imagined possible. So what do we do with this? How can we truly receive the promise of true freedom through surrender? Well, I would say that the first step is accept. See, freedom can't be experienced until it's accepted.
That's good. And it seems almost too basic, right? Like, obviously, especially for those of us who are following Jesus, we're like, oh, accept. We associate that with, oh, I accepted Jesus' gift of salvation. But, you know, there's more steps of acceptance along the way, and it's a daily journey. Because I have found for myself, I can know something is available, but there's a difference between knowing it and using it, right? My middle schoolers know about deodorant. I'll just leave it there. I taught middle school for a while. It's an experience. But I learned this, you know, because I am very self-reliant. Any other self-reliant people, I'm a do-it-myself, independent person. And so people would say to me, like, hey, if you ever need anything, I'm here. If you ever need anything. I'm like, oh, thank you so much. I got this, right? And so it took, actually, in 2010, we had a house fire. And we had 2 of our kids at the time. Lucas wasn't born yet. And all of a sudden, we lived far from family. And I realized, oh, all those people who said, hey, I'm here if you need me, I actually had to take advantage of that. And I had to call on them and say, hey, can you watch the kids while we sift through this? Can you do this? Can you help? And I found this amazing freedom that came when I was willing to accept their help. And here's what I found. Not a single one of them was like, I didn't really mean it, but okay. They were like happy to help. And that's the thing, is that sometimes we forget that it brings joy to Jesus' heart when we say, God, I do want to accept your gift of freedom. I do want to surrender this to you. There's no shame in it. It's about time. I've been waiting here to help you. And it's all throughout the New Testament. Jesus talks about freedom. Paul writes about freedom in 2 Corinthians 3:17. The Lord is the Spirit. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Galatians 5:1, Paul writes, so Christ has truly set us free. Now make sure you stay free. Oh, that one gets me. Make sure you stay free. Don't get tied up again in slavery to the law.
See, the secret to experiencing the freedom that Jesus is trying to share with us is to release our need for control over everything.
That's a lot easier said than done.
I like reading that sentence. But this allows us to experience the freedom that he designed us for. But it is a gift that we need to make a conscious choice to accept. Anybody ever have somebody send you a gift and you sit it on the counter and you're like, I want to wait till they're here to open it. And they'll be like, hey, did you like my gift? No, I didn't open it yet. You're not here. And then you wait. You have the gift. It's sitting there on the counter. But unless you unwrap it and access it, we are wasting the gift of freedom that God has offered us.
So the first thing we need to do is accept that gift of forgiveness. The second thing is the active step, because accepting it, acknowledging it is different than stepping out and doing, right? So the second thing we need to do is we need to actually make an exchange. Okay, I'm very non-confrontational. I do not, it is not a good thing. I'm not bragging about this. To the point, I do not like returning things at the store. I get very uncomfortable, like I apologize. I'm sorry, this didn't fit. Can I please? And so I send my husband, because he has no problem doing any of that. But he is
one of my spiritual gifts.
It is great. But you know, there's a difference between a return and an exchange. An exchange, you get something back. So when Jesus is saying surrender, we're laying down, but it's actually an exchange because of what we're getting back. We're exchanging the pressures of living weighed down by society's demands, by your feelings. We're exchanging it for the freedom that comes from walking with Jesus. And I say with because Jesus isn't calling us to do it alone. Right? In this verse, he says, my yoke is easy. What was a yoke? A yoke was something that connected two oxen together. Jesus says, the yoke I have for you, come on, let's walk this journey together. I'm going to bear that burden with you and for you. So if we don't fight against it, but fall in line with Jesus and say, I'm going to make that exchange. Here's all the pressures that are weighing me down. Instead, I want to walk with you, hand in hand in your strength.
So instead, we exchange worry and wait for constant reminders of his truth and his freedom that's being offered, and the fact that his ways are so much better than our ways. The idea of exchange goes back to what we said earlier about worry, and I hope it didn't come across as demeaning. Worry is a real thing. It's just not one of the things I struggle with. I'm confident you've got some things like that I'm struggling with, just to be clear. But he doesn't just say don't do it. He gives us a solution, right? He says, cast all your cares on me because I'll care for you. The idea of exchange is beautiful. Replace anxious thoughts with truth. Philippians 4:8 says, and now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing, fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about these things that are excellent and worthy of praise.
Can I give one more Greek nugget?
You have 30 seconds.
Okay.
Of course.
I'll use my northern talk and talk really fast. You know, it's so easy sometimes when we come to the word and when we speak, it feels abstract. And you're like, but give me the step. What do I actually do? What does it look like to do this? What does it look like to exchange? Because we're not talking about something we can physically see necessarily. But when Paul talks about this and he says, fix your thoughts on these things, that is an actual action that is active that we can do. This is a step we can take, and it's called fixing our thoughts. Saying, I'm going to choose to think about this. And that word at the end that says, when he says, think on these things, this word think, it's an active verb. It means to take into account, to come to a bottom line or a logical conclusion or decision. And it makes me wonder how much better my life would be if that list of things, whatever's pure, right, lovely, noble, of good report, if that would be my bottom line. When it comes to my thoughts, the bottom line is I can run it through this funnel. Does it follow all of those things? If so, I'm going to fix my thoughts there. If not, I'm going to stop and say, God, help me fix my thoughts and see my situation in that light instead. What if we replaced our time spent asking God to do what we'd like him to do and instead spent asking for his wisdom, direction, and his will to be done? This week, my challenge for myself, and maybe you'd like to join me on this. God challenged me to exchange, to replace my, God, will you see to it that my plans succeed prayers, for instead, God, will you lead me into your plan? And will you give me the wisdom and the strength to do my part in that? The days that I do that, here's what I have found. When I see my days as being orchestrated by a good father, it takes away the crushing burden of self-reliance. But I have to stop and make the exchange and say, God, here's my plans, but I'm going to offer them to you. Would you let me see my day as controlled by a good father? It's a gift that he offers to us.
You know, Peter Reeves said, we often spend so much time asking God to bless what we're doing instead of asking God, what do you want to bless? What do you want to bless? And let me walk in that way, because that changes everything. Paul said it so well in Galatians 4:6. And because we are his children, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, prompting us to call out, Abba, Father. Now you are no longer a slave, but God's own child. And since you are his child, God has made you his heir. We're king's kids. When we surrender our control, it opens up the opportunity for God to give us the inheritance he designed us for. And that inheritance of freedom. And it's beautiful because we can celebrate that freedom. We experience true freedom when we surrender everything to Jesus. As the band comes to get in place, I have a few questions for you just to consider as we close. I have found in this journey, anybody relate to Paul? I think it's Romans 8 where he says, the good I want to do, I do not do.
7.
Is it 7? She memorized Romans, so it makes sense. We won't talk about the 9 books of the Bible she's memorized in her lifetime. But here's the question. Have you chosen to accept Jesus' freedom instead of depending on yourself? If you haven't, you're one good decision away. He's waiting with open arms. He's not looking down on you. He's not telling you what's wrong with you because you haven't yet. He's waiting to make your life better as we surrender. If you haven't yet, I challenge you to give it a try. I promise it's something you won't regret. He's a good father who loves you and has good plans for you. Another question for you. What is a burden that you are carrying that is not part of Jesus' plan for you? What is something that you've said, and maybe you're like me, and you surrendered that and taken it back. And surrendered it and taken it back again. His goal is not for us to carry those weights. Are you ready to exchange it for the rest that Jesus designed you for? You know, the verse, cast all your cares on him, continues to bubble to my spirit right now. So I'm going to give you a 20-second explanation. If you look up what that verse means, it literally means that Jesus says, cast all your cares on me and let me care about them for you. The King of the universe says you can be free from worrying about that because I want to worry about it for you. I've got this. I've got you. You don't have to worry. And he's faithful. So as we close, this is one of those messages that's like, okay, go do it. And I don't love those as much sometimes. Like, yeah, challenge me. You can do better. Good job. Yeah, I'm going to do better. But this is one of those ones like, let's do it. And here's the beautiful thing. It's not self-reliant. Let's do it. It's surrender that offers freedom. And so this morning as we close, we're going to sing the chorus of I Surrender All one time. And just like I said in the Bible, and then they sang a hymn, and they went home. And so we're going to sing the chorus of that hymn. And I don't know what surrender looks like for you, but I'll make this promise to you. We know what to do, what the international sign of surrender is. Right? We know that's the international sign of surrender. Another sign of surrender is hitting your knees. I don't know what surrender looks like for you this morning, but I know this. Jesus is waiting with loving, open arms. And so as we sing this song, some of you are going to say, that's great, Pastor Bernie. Appreciate you. I'm out. Awesome. Take it and run with it. Some of you may say, I need to hit that altar for a second. I need to surrender. And if that's you, I promise the pastoral staff will be here till everybody's been prayed for that wants prayer. And the beautiful thing is, you don't even need us. He's just waiting. I surrender all. Jesus, I surrender all to thee, my blessed Savior. I surrender all. One more time. I surrender all. I surrender all. Jesus, I surrender all to thee, my blessed Savior. I surrender all. Lord, I pray that you'd give us the strength to surrender and the willingness to follow through on what you've called us to. Lord, help us to take that easy yoke, the perfect